And today we're talking about millennials, which is a mainstream media buzzword that roughly translates to kids these days, I guess. You know, they've been blamed for high unemployment, being too needy, soft of body and will. And this isn't the first time, obviously, that CEO and news anchor age people have been alarmed about a younger generation. Obviously, in the 90s, Generation X was accused of slackerism, I believe was the technical term. But if you've been paying attention to the mainstream media lately, you would get the impression that this particular generation of kids, these millennials, did something extra super bad to piss everyone off.
Aimless, entitled young people who refuse to get jobs or whatever. And so there's very frequently now very angry, mean-spirited articles about this generation that's ruining the world because they were coddled as children, or they didn't face enough challenges, or their parents didn't beat them enough, or whatever the narrative is. And what had spawned the idea for this podcast, there was like a really nasty column written in the Boston Globe, and they were citing statistics about how there's 6 million of those people in the United States ages 16 to 24 who don't have jobs, are not looking for jobs, don't intend to get jobs or careers, or not in college. You know, this is the pending end of civilization.
Sure.
And while, I mean, obviously I'm not here to stand up for hipsters, because that's, even the Pope came out recently and said, this is the one group that can't be saved. We're kind of, I think, moving in the first world, at least, to a point where not everybody has to work in order to make society function, but we don't know how to feel about that. And so if you have somebody whose parents are like well-to-do enough that they can kind of like kick back and not do anything, we sort of fly into a rage. And I think very soon we're going to reach a point in the world where it's not going to make sense to have that reaction anymore, because like you said, this is kind of what we wanted for society, right?
The main narrative that people seem to be scared of when it comes to the millennial is this idea that kids would be okay with being unemployed. The stat you always see repeated is that this generation, 50% of them would rather be unemployed than work at a job that they hate. And people are like outraged at that.
Right, because everybody has like, well, when I was your age, I certainly didn't want to go off to fight the Viet Cong, but by God, I did it anyway. And then when I came back, I didn't want to have to work in a horse glue factory running the horse melting machine.
Weren't you doing that when we hired you to work at Craft? You were melting horses?
On my own. It turned out that's actually not a real job or even legal. When I was in school, in elementary school, we watched a film strip that had been made in the 60s, and we didn't watch it to make fun of it. But it was a film strip about the 3-day work week. In the future, you're going to be work for 3 days, and you're going to be off for 4.
The George Jetson work week.
This is referenced everywhere from that era. The Jetsons was about this too, where he had some meaningless job. But this film strip was about, this obviously would have been the early 80s for me. We were watching as like, this is yet another strip about the neat things that's coming in the future. And that strip, the point was, the big problem of the future is going to be finding ways to entertain everybody, because people are going to have so much spare time. And the reason they were talking about a 3-day work week was a very logical, like already they could see everything was being automated. The machines were coming to the car factory already, farm work had transformed to where it used to take 300 people to pick the crops, and now one guy can do it with a combine. So they were just extrapolating into the future, saying, look, there's going to be way less labor needed, but this stuff is still getting done. It's not like an apocalypse where everybody's unemployed and poor. The food's still being grown, the cars are still being made, so all the goods are still there. It's just it no longer takes a person to make them. So let's celebrate, because in the future this is going to mean there's not going to be these dumbass jobs, these menial labor jobs, and so we'll all just get to kick back and have fun for most of the week. Now, I don't know if the listeners realize this, but that's actually not the way it played out, as it turns out. I mean, it played out in one part of it, which is that productivity, which is the amount of stuff we make per hour worked. That's what the productivity stat means. And if you Google it, you can get a line graph that shows that number just has gone up and up and up and up and up. From 1948, from the end of World War II until now, productivity is up 254%. And that continued unabated through the Great Recession. Unemployment skyrocketed. That did not harm productivity one tiny bit because it simply encouraged companies that before had not used machines to do things to simply go ahead and buy the machine because it was cheaper than hiring a person. So the amount of stuff that's getting made has gone up completely unabated, no problems at all. Obviously, the reason that's continued to go up is not because we're suddenly working much, much faster. It's just because of automation, because they have machines doing everything. So we got to that, and like now we have a permanently higher unemployment rate, it seems like, after the Great Recession. And the reason is because employers simply adapted to having fewer people. So we're seeing unemployment edge up and up and up, and we regard this as a crisis, even though, weirdly, this is kind of what we all thought was going to come true. It's just that we thought everybody would get a bunch of extra time off, and that's not what's happening at all. The people who are working are still working a lot of hours, and the people who have part-time jobs now have to work 2 part-time jobs in order to pay the rent, and then everybody else is just made to stay home. And we get really mad at the people who are staying home. I mean, you listen to this during the election, it's, talking about people that are on unemployment or on food stamps, and these are parasites and these are leeches, even though everything we have been working for in the last 100 years or so has been toward getting to a society where people don't have to work. And so now we're sort of here, and if you have a generation that's now saying, I'm not excited about going and working at Starbucks, or I'm not excited about going and working some service job that could easily be done by a machine, I don't know that it's that crazy that they're not excited about it.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the Jeffersons and Star Trek have the advantage that they get to design their utopian society with the knowledge that it's a post-scarcity world, whereas we've ridden into
the
this.
Jeffersons there.
That's who we're talking about, right? The futuristic George Jefferson. But yeah, so George Jefferson gets to decide that he lives in this society that's post-scarcity. But, we've ridden into this world on a society that thrives on competition and the threat of starvation to fuel that competition. And so there's not just this even distribution of 3-hour work weeks, and instead you have a bunch of people working really hard based on pre-existing values that kept everything moving forward in the past, and then a bunch of people who have sort of figured out the game, figured out how to either mooch off their parents or get by on a subsistence level job and sort of have it figured out, or are reaping the benefits of this new world. And it makes sense that the people who are left behind would be angry at these new people who have adapted so well to the Jeffersonian economy.
Even though this is kind of what it's not true that this is what we wanted for our children, but why did you build a road to last for like 100 years? If not, it wasn't so the next generation wouldn't have to do it. You know what I mean? Like, we do it so they've got it to use. But in terms of the motivation, if you go back 100 years, all right, to 1913, and take your hypothetical 22-year-old living on a farm, you tell that kid, look, you've got to get up at 5 and help me milk the cows or whatever, or else we're going to starve, or else we're going to die if you don't do that. I think that's tons of motivation. I think that kid has no problem getting up at 5 because he knows that's true. If you fast forward 100 years to 2013 and you're telling that same kid, well, look, we've got machines that grow the food mostly now. It only takes a couple of guys. Food is dirt cheap. Fuel is cheap. There's plenty of everything, to the point that our entire economy is really based around convincing you to buy different things every year that you don't necessarily need. But we still need you to get up early and go do labor just because that's what we do. The only difference is now, instead of going out and like milking the cows or harvesting the crops so everybody has food to eat, now we just need you to go stand behind a counter and hand people the coffee that the machine makes. There's totally machines they could just go up to and get it themselves, but your job will be to hand it to them. And they'll give you the money. And if you ask, well, why, and oh, by the way, this job pays so little, you need two of them. You need a full-time, probably need another part-time. So you're going to be spending all of your time doing this. You're not going to have time to develop your hobbies, your relationships, to better yourself or anything else. And then you'll just keep doing this until you die. And you're doing it so you can afford to buy the things that the machines are making or the Chinese are making. I'm not saying that every unemployed 20-something has thought through this. I'm just saying it's not crazy that that's not as motivating a factor as it once was, and it's fairly reasonable. Now, again, the way the economy is kind of panning out, you've got this sector of professionals, right? You've got IT people, you've got doctors, you've got lawyers, you've got people with advanced degrees and that sort of thing. And then now you've got this vast swath of the economy that is just these service jobs that could easily be done by a machine. And I'm not insulting the people who do these jobs. I mean, I still, in my life right now, I have more years in service jobs than what I have in doing whatever you call this. They work hard, but they work hard at a task that doesn't challenge them, doesn't enrich them, and doesn't take advantage of what a human animal is capable of. And that can and will be automated away very soon. So how are you supposed to feel about that? Like, I would almost be more worried about a 20-something who bought into that than one who refuses to buy into it and says, look, for what I can get on food stamps or for my parents or whatever, I can make friends, I can read books, I can do things to enjoy my life. I'm not sure that's that absurd of a thing to think. But it's not even that we think of it as being absurd, it's that we think of it as a moral failing. There's some innate moral value in doing hard work, but is that still true if the work you're doing is pointless and menial?
Right, if the job is almost being created for you, in a sense. They're leaving this job non-automated so you have something to do. It's almost like being on a hamster wheel, and the hamster wheel is just there for the sake of being there so that the hamster has something to do.
To keep this cycle running, right? Just to keep you busy. Once upon a time, you went out in the field and you grew the food that everybody needed to eat. And if they didn't have it, they would starve. Or you went to some terrible textile factory, but you made the clothes that everybody wore, or else they would be nude. We've gotten into a weird place in society, or in history rather, where we kind of just need to keep people busy so they won't riot in the streets. It's almost like what we need these people to do most is just to buy things. We need consumers so that the people at Foxconn and the factories they have over there, there's someone to buy the stuff. And if you think that's a weird reason to exist, go outside, go look around, go on the internet. You will be bombarded with advertisements begging you to buy things every 5 seconds. There's banner ads around this podcast. There's a billboard outside your window, turn on TV. You exist in society for 5 minutes, it becomes clear that that's where we are. Like, what we need you to do right now is to buy things, and then the only reason you're going to get up in the morning and work doing a job that could easily be done by a machine is so that we can continue the cycle. So we can pretend like you did something in exchange for the new cell phone we're going to ask you to buy or the new clothes we're going to ask you to buy.
Right. You wrote an article a few years ago, I think, about sort of this idea that we're already more of a